And here we are. So, another great episode of the manufacturing margin, in which we look at how to bring more money to folks who are trying to make things and automate it and successfully use automation to work their operations. And we have Tim Hatcher today, who's the head of TIW, and they are brilliantly experienced manufacturing ERP experts and producers of a very excellent system. And Tim happens to be very experienced directly in manufacturing, and so I thought he'd be a great one to talk about these issues. So, Tim, why don't you give us a recap of some of what your experience has been in this?
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on, Mark.
Sure.
So, as Mark mentioned, I'm Tim Hatcher from TIW, and my company produces ERP software for uh, small and large companies. So, my personal background is I come out of aerospace and defense. I worked as a certified aircraft mechanic for probably about 10 years before entering the ERP industry. And I've done everything from C&D checks on commercial aircraft to field support and production for a UAV manufacturer. And I did a lot of that support kind of out there and saw a lot of things and built a lot of things and various aircraft and sort of got to understand how ERP actually fits into the world of manufacturing and why it actually is important.
Where do you think the things you've seen over the years? I mean, I love, as we've talked before, it's like your experience as a user is so, and that's the biggest thing for those of us who actually use this stuff and try and do our jobs. It's like to manage complex projects, you know, how it doesn't always work and how a lot of these offerings from other folks don't really fulfill, which again informs you as a maker of a solution provider, how to do it right, right?
Right. So I had the fortune or misfortune, depending upon how you look at it, of being through two ERP implementations from previous employers. And in both cases, what we found, or what I found anyway, from the end user experience, was that data entry was always kind of a secondary consideration to the implementation of the package. So you'll go through the process of putting your inventory in there and getting your costs right, and making the fancy dashboards for the C-suite. But your guys on the floor end up getting 15 minutes worth of training before you go live with the package. So you end up going live after 3, 4, 5, 6 years of implementing, which that's a whole other subject of how god awful long they take sometimes. And immediately your production shuts down and everybody points fingers at each other and says, "Oh my God, what happened? And how could this happen? And we spent so much money on this. And why didn't we do this? And why aren't the numbers right?" And you go through this whole thing, and it's like, well, if you're putting garbage into the system, you're going to get garbage out of the system. And if you make it difficult for somebody who sees their job as producing finished goods to put data into the system, they're going to put the minimum amount of effort into entering data into the system as they can.
Oh,
So from there, what you have to draw from that is project managers describe this as internal resistance to the project, but a lot of times it's unconscious resistance to the project that you're going to see. So what you find is you can leverage a set of automation tools, training, things like that that can make the data entry more efficient and more exact. So that way, as you implement the system, as you withdraw inventory, as you push finished goods in, as you issue more inventory to your manufacturing, you're actually getting the correct data into the system the first time. Because otherwise, what ends up happening is you end up having to go back and back end the
right.
system And you know, as a manufacturer, as a data analyst, as somebody, that's not a problem for us to do. But for your average user, it becomes a hassle having to call somebody all the time to fix data,
Right.
and then you blame the system. And realistically, it may not be the system's fault, but you got to get it right the first time. Otherwise, you're chasing your tail
Yeah.
constantly, and the system becomes this massive thing that you have to maintain.
Well, and don't you think? I mean, one of the things that that speaks to is why before we even get into the automation, having us in that role where you analyze and you really understand what the folks on the shop floor need, what the people in sales need, what every the actual users need, and let that drive the implementation. It changes everything, doesn't it?
Yeah, so bottom up methodologies for when you study how to implement a system, I cannot stress enough how important they are. It's great from doing it the opposite way when you're buying a system, when you're looking at systems. There are going to be things that that you need, right? So we know we need inventory, we know we need GL, we know we need a manufacturing system, we know we need MRP to make our lives more, make the planners' lives easier. But the other side of that is it's always a little more resource intensive to do, but it's worth every dollar that you put into it, which is the bottom up look at it. So you go out on the floor. Um, where are the touch points in manufacturing? Where does data actually get entered? When does inventory get issued out of your stock room? How is it controlled? When do we put the serial numbers in there? Are we quarantining things before they go into inventory and doing inspections? Those are very important and very critical pieces of information to know when you're implementing the system, because it'll affect basically everything else. You don't want to
Yeah.
find something like that out later, because then you're sitting there trying to make expensive modifications to the system. You're trying to basically beat the system into shape after the fact, which
Right.
then you're fighting with the system. And again, we go back to the internal resistance that you experience with these projects, which causes their high failure rate.
Right. I mean, and this is why, it used to be the thing where people would easily fund the hardware, then they would fund the software, but still, especially for smaller businesses, they have a hard time recognizing the value of first optimizing the workflow and getting help to do that. I mean, because, it's like the best tool in the world, we have to build the house to suit you, and if we don't even know your actual and you don't know your workflow, you know it's and this is why, a lot of these SaaS deliveries, how can they serve? They don't know your workflow. They don't really, they don't really care.
Yeah, and that's the big difference between your on-prem and your SaaS type offerings. SaaS can be customized to a degree. I mean, you can customize reports, you can do various things here and there within it, but your on-prem type software will give you a great deal more flexibility with the code base, that you can modify things, you can make those big changes if you need to,
Right.
um, and get the workflow working exactly the way that you want it to, rather than attempting to. I wouldn't call it a workaround, but sometimes the standard way of doing things can be a little more cumbersome than people would like, and that just simply goes to the workflow. I mean, how different are you than other companies that you work with? I mean, ERP is there are packages that are tailored to certain verticals, but that usually comes with the downside of not necessarily working real well, or a weakness in some other area. Your general purpose packages are designed to handle your financials, designed to give you the best practices from GAAP or IFRS, or work within manufacturing. But there are always things you can do to tweak around the margins or streamline the process, which is what your implementer and your analyst is going to help significantly with.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes to exactly, why we're both certainly advocates of using tools where you can just modularly do something, and we can now flip it on its ear and use leverage all of that prior development and it fit into a bizarre workflow piece, which is for quality control or business rule or who knows. But I mean, that's why for all that vertical concepts work, when I look at how often people in very similar practices do things differently because they have different desires, strategies about quality control, about what to be looking at. I mean, there's some universals, but some of this stuff is this is the way that owner operator needs it to go.
Right. Yeah, and the point is to have strong fundamentals, and that's really what you're looking for in that system. I mean, if you want to enter something a certain way, or you want to approve specific transactions before they go in, I mean, that's all stuff that can be set up later. But if your books are wrong, your business runs on that. I mean, you're so it's real important to have the your issuances and control your inventory and control your financials in a manner that can be audited and has those strong fundamentals.
Yeah.
So that way you can simply build on that. If the foundation is wrong, everything you build on top of it is going to be flawed in some way afterward.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why, also, I mean, I think one of the things to look for in, vendors to help with this is like what, some of us found value in doing our life work, which is we like taking this stuff and then modifying to people's bizarre individual needs. It's like
Yep.
this, but it's like not everybody wants this. I mean, even some of these bigger suppliers, say they're going to offer that, but it's very cumbersome. It's a hard solution. So I mean, part of like what I'm always proselytizing for is this hybrid approach of using all this development that we've all done, right? And you can get a module for a fairly low and then modify. Then we identify what really would make a huge difference if it also could do this or that. And that makes 100%.
Yes, it does. So,
Where do you
uh,
think you've seen, in terms of manufacturers who have automated, do you think the biggest places have been in sort of the sale, complex project selling and project management? Do you think it's in shop floor efficiencies, or is it in demand forecast work? Where have you seen things?
it varies from manufacturer to manufacturer, but some of the bigger projects we've done revolve around odd ways that you would handle your lot and serial control. So, splitting a serial number, for instance, is not anything like splitting a lot number. Um, so, we've done those where we can do a lot of the inheritance type work for serial numbers. Reporting tends to be the biggest thing that you change within your accounting package. So, um, what you will find, especially in accounting, is we want numbers presented certain ways. We want uh, various, reports done with the time phasing differently. We want, GL numbers excluded, GL numbers included on various reports. So that's where you see a lot of that um, report type work.
Right.
Reports are a fairly simple thing. Okay, we're not talking about building SQL queries or doing some kind of programming every time you need to do the report. We're talking about adding options to some grids, and you select the correct options, and it spits out the report for you. And that's definitely the low level, easy to do, fairly inexpensive to implement part of how you handle your accounting. Same thing with inventory. We modify a lot of inventory type reports to pick tickets, for instance. We just did one where we handle a lot of the processing and dealing with the warehouse flows as you kind of go through the warehouse and do your picking. Um, but manufacturing is where we often see the most sort of heavy duty and meaningful modifications to the system. Uh, that's simply because we do things like scripting entire workflows using the data acquisition package. So you could essentially barcode your entire way through a process without ever touching the big package itself, right? So you don't need all the options to be able to, backflush, return, change yields, things like that on your average person that's handling the data entry. The goal for them, as going back to that, person on the shop floor that just wants to build the thing, is to take their work order traveler, they scan their way through it. There's a couple of barcodes, taped to the shop floor terminal. If they scan, if something goes wrong and they need to make some correction, overissue, return something to stock, whatever the situation might be. And that way, everything's completely scripted. You can walk through it. You can enter the data quickly and accurately with less frustration, guides you through the process. You're off to the races. Um, the real heavy duty stuff comes in, especially from the MRP side of things, right? Doing that material requirement planning work.
Right.
Um, we do a lot of work in that area with our MRP engine to modify the way that it may work, include best case, worst case uh, issuance scenarios or material scenarios, doing a lot of breakpoint work where we need to modify the inputs in some way. So you're you have multiple facilities. We're going to handle the transfer orders between the facilities, but the lead times are different. So we need to include a different lead for the transfer as opposed to the actual ordering from a manufacturer or a supplier and having them shipped to you. Um, we also handle a lot of kind of custom transaction work, especially with the manufacturing order, where there is something that is done that would be outside the norm. So, for instance, you are reworking WIP as part of your quality control process, right? So, quality control is always a little bit of a interesting subject to talk through with people because oftentimes you're not quality controlling a finished good, you're quality controlling your WIP. Okay. And from an accounting perspective, that makes a huge difference because we're not dealing with something that's a finished good that's in inventory that we're then sending back to rework. We're dealing with something that essentially has no form, but you need to add material to it. You need to add time to the work order to it. You need to essentially change your cost of the finished good, and you need a way to roll that all back together at the end of the work order to say, hey, even though I've split this work order 3 or 4 times, when it all comes back together and I get the final output that I was planning for, I need to know what the costs were, including quality control, rather than trying to figure that out later, which I'm sure accountants love that. But if you don't like paying your accountant $3,000 a month, you should probably look into a better way of doing it. So we handle a lot of those kinds of flows where we split WIP off into different work orders. You rework it within the package, you merge it back into the original order.
Right.
Doing a lot of lot and serial issuance type work where we deal with, are we going to recursively issue lot numbers to a work order until we run out of one? Or are we going to handle it so that you can only issue full lots to certain jobs? And a lot of that's baked into the package, but there are these sort of edge cases that really take it to extremes.
And the point there, I think, is what sometimes people don't see is, if you don't do this, if you imagine you can use the sort of, off the shelf trousers and do this the way everybody else, and you miss this one piece of quality control, this one piece of audit, this one piece, and it's somebody's doing it in a spreadsheet then, and you end up with human error, and you end up saying, like, what does it cost you when it happens once? What does it cost when you do it twice on a project or to a customer? And it's like that. A lot of people don't recognize the pain of doing these things inefficiently, right?
Yeah, and you've probably heard me say this before, but if you're using a spreadsheet is not a database. So if you're using a spreadsheet, that data is not related to anything. It needs to be in the ERP package, because that is the only way that you can make that data in the spreadsheet meaningful.
Yeah.
Um, so take a look at your spreadsheets, find out what you're using them for, why you're using them, and then have a discussion with the analyst to figure out, okay, what is this data related to? How should it be entered into the system? Because that way we can create a very inexpensive report that you can then run all the time, and we can figure out how to get the data entered and where that touch point is to enter the data, and make sure that you can pull it out of the system without having to talk to somebody in accounting and then talk to somebody in inventory, and then pull everything together when the tax man comes knocking or something like that.
Right. I mean, as well as building, the business rule that would say we're going to alert manager X under X condition, and
Yep.
I mean, the thing of, like, it's something that people don't fully acknowledge sometimes in our current society, but it's that old adage of a stitch in time saves nine. And if you do this stuff properly and you put a little extra attention to the front end, and then give attention to these things as if you were, in this new role as an operator, as a manager, which is you're a designer. You're going to work with us for the life of your company to make sure it's, running efficiently.
Yep.
And
And
that's the best thing.
I tell people a lot, your business lives within this software package. I mean, you may have all the fixed assets and everything that um, are worth more than what a system is, but the data within this system is what you're going to rely on for basically any situation you may find yourself in. And it's very critical that that be right. Um, I'm sure everybody's experienced some kind of inventory issue at some point, right? But if issuing inventory is easy, you're gonna issue the inventory, or you're gonna collect that data and make sure that it's right. Okay, and that's got a lot of downstream effects on how often we need to audit the inventory, how often we need to run a cycle count, what my actual valuation is of my inventory. Okay, and that's again identifying those touch points, getting that training is where the business analyst comes in and helps a lot with getting that right. So everybody's comfortable with it. Don't train your people 15 minutes before you go live, because it just leads to these situations where everybody hates the system.
Yeah.
It's like, well, is it really the system's fault though?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think on that note, I'm always reinforcing how us humans actually are still important in this world of automation and intelligence. We're part of the intelligence part. So
We
thanks,
are.
Jim. And I think this has been a good help. I think people will get some good insight here. And we'll do another one sometime soon.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate you having me on. Good conversation there, Mark.
Great.